This video will cover display configurations in AutoCAD architecture, how they control the display of AEC objects, and how you can use them to make AutoCAD architecture work for building information modeling. You'll notice at your lower right that you have a button that says medium detail by default. It might say something else if you've changed that. And it will also depend on which file you're currently in. For example, if you have an older CAD file that was created in vanilla AutoCAD, and then you bring that into AutoCAD architecture, then it's not going to say medium detail because those display configurations are not set up in that file. So if you're going to be using display configurations, it's always important to create your file using a template that was designed for AutoCAD architecture from the start. For example, when you look at your templates, you would want to normally use an AEC model, CTB, or STB template for when you're working in AutoCAD architecture for a model file that you're going to use to draw your building in. If you have an older CAD file that you want to use display configurations with, you can create a new file in AutoCAD architecture and then bring your objects into that through copy paste or the insert command or things like that to bring your file up to kind of the current template type. When you hit your display configuration button, you'll notice then that you have about 10 or a dozen choices of default display configurations that will help you to kind of get started. And it's a great thing to use those as a starting point because you're not creating something from scratch then. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of times these will do something like close to what you already want. The other thing that's important is immediately to the right of that button that says your cut plane height, and that indicates the height in the Z direction of where your floor plan view is being cut. So right now, the plan view that I'm looking at is cut 3'6" above the Z height of 0. So now let's talk about what are display configurations, how do we customize them a little bit. So let me show you a real quick example of what this will do if I change this setting, and then that'll help you to kind of get the idea of what these are for. If I change from medium detail to low detail, then you'll notice that everything is shown in a more simple way. For example, I lose the hatch in the walls. I lose the multiple components. For example, this used to be a block wall that had a furring and gypsum board on it, but now it's only showing as two simple lines. So there's very little detail. The doors are very simple. It just has a single line and then an arc for the swing. The stair is more simple. It doesn't show the railing except for that one line. So it simplifies the drawing to a much greater extent. Medium detail was where I was earlier. That's your normal. And then you have also high detail. And then when you're in high detail, you'll notice that it is showing more hatch patterns in the components of your wall. The hatch of the walls themselves, the hatch within the walls is a smaller scale. I'm seeing more detail on the staircase. So that's customizing the display of your objects. And that's what the system is all about. It allows you to take a three-dimensional model and then extract out different views like plans, sections, elevations, and other views from the model. So it really goes back to the whole concept of what building information modeling is all about. The challenge is you have to, if you're going to use this to really dive into building information modeling 100%, then that means everything in your project has to be an AEC object or a multi-view block reference. So if I wanted to draw my kitchen counters here, I can't just draw lines. I mean, I could, and then I could use them for my plans, but if I wanted to stack the two stories of this building one on top of the other, and then pull out the second floor plan and the first floor plan separately, like you really would want to do in BIM, well then those lines are not going to turn on or off automatically through my display configuration. So then I end up fiddling with layers and display configurations, or you're kind of just losing out on a lot of the benefit. So then you really dive into using AEC objects and multi-view block references 100% if you really want to use AutoCAD architecture for BIM. It's not an easy thing to do it 100% all the way. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Let me just flip through a couple more of these display configurations to show you kind of what they do. I'm going to go to presentation, and now it's showing kind of a medium level of detail, but it's showing a consistent hatch pattern throughout all the walls. And that's nice if you're doing a schematic design presentation because you don't want to be distracted by, what is the construction of this wall versus that wall. You just want to show the layout of the rooms, the general space plan, and how the arrangement of the rooms is working. So presentation is kind of good for that purpose. Then the next one we have is reflected, which is more for reflected ceiling plans. So you'll notice that it's turned off the doors. If I had a ceiling drawn, it would now be showing up. So that's what reflected is kind of intended to be for. You also have screened ones, which you'll notice will screen out or grayscale everything. So this would be great if you were doing maybe a mechanical engineering drawing of the HVAC system or something along those lines, and you wanted to emphasize certain things. Or you could do this for a life safety plan because you're trying to emphasize where the fire rated walls are, so you could have everything else screened except for fire rated walls and travel distances, fire extinguishers, exit signs, those types of things. So that's what this is, that system is all about, is to kind of automatically change the display of the AEC objects between different preset configurations. That's what the basic concept is. So I'm going to go back to medium detail. That's always kind of my default one because I usually use that for floor plans. So now, how do we kind of tweak some of the settings for those and talk about how those are made up? I'm going to go to the Manage tab on the ribbon, and then I have a Display Manager button on that tab on your ribbon, Display Manager. So this is where you get into kind of the nitty-gritty details of how those configurations are being used, and I can tweak some settings now. You'll notice when you're in the Display Manager that you have 3 words on the left side that you can expand with the little pluses. So the first option is configurations, and those are simply the choices that you have down there on that button that I was just hitting. It's showing medium detail as bold because that's the currently applied configuration that I have in my drawing. If I click on that, on the right side here, you can see how it has top view, bottom view, left view, right view, etc. Each of those is pulling a specific group of settings to apply based upon my view direction. So when I'm in the top view, which is my normal view for a floor plan, it's pulling the settings for what everything should look like from a display representation set called plan. Now when I'm in bottom view, it's pulling a different display representation set, and that's plan diagnostic. Left, right, front, and back are all using the same section elevation one, and then the default view direction, which means really anything other than that, like an isometric view, for example, would pull the model display representation set. So there's 4 different representation sets that are being merged together into this one configuration. So the overall configuration is what's then being applied to my CAD file, and the only thing that I change is my view direction, and the display representation set is what's dictating how everything looks depending on that view direction. So now let's look at the sets and see, okay, well, what does that mean for the plan representation set? So I'm going to expand sets on the left now, and there's the plan one, which is also set as bold. So if I click on that, this is basically all these checkboxes allow me to turn visibility of objects on and off. So this is what's then being applied when I'm in medium detail configuration in a top view. Because of what I just said earlier, when I'm on medium detail in a top view, the plan one is bold and set there. So now this is what's actually being applied in terms of visibility of objects. So if I look at, let's say I look at walls, there's one check there, and if I go up to the top, you can see that that says plan. So what that means is, for my walls, there's a display representation settings that have been set up for plan views, and then if you want them to be turned on, in other words visible, then that check needs to stay checked down there under plan and to the right of walls. So the most important thing that you'll do here occasionally is turn something on or off. So an example of that would be the ceiling grid. Remember earlier I said that there was the reflected display configuration, which is used for ceiling plans. So you'll notice when I look at the ceiling grid row, everything is not checked. because the ceiling grid would normally then be turned off when I'm in medium detail, because medium detail would be more for floor plans. If I did not want to rely on my display configuration for getting a ceiling plan, then I would want the ceiling grid to actually be turned on when I'm in medium detail mode. So in that case, I could put a check there next to ceiling grid under plan, and then that would turn on my ceiling grid so that I could work with a ceiling plan while I was still in medium detail mode. Now, if I don't want to do that and I want to use it more the way that AutoCAD intends us to, then I can go down to Reflected and see on the display configuration, and then look at top view, and you can see that it's the reflected display representation set. So now I'm going to go down to Reflected under my sets and see, okay, now let's look at the ceiling grid again. And as you go over to the right, you can see that there's a reflected setting that's checked. So that's going to turn the ceiling grid on when I'm in my reflected display configuration. So now let's look at the third section here on the left side. So we had configurations, which again is pulling one for each view angle, like top view. And then this is what it's actually pulling in terms of turning things on and off in terms of visibility. Now, so what does that mean? So now I'm going to go to the object types, and that's the third level. So we're kind of digging down into the deepest level of the hierarchy here. So now if I go to ceiling grid and reflected, see under ceiling grid there's looks like 7 different options that you could have for how the ceiling grid is going to be shown. That's what these are, the representations for each type of object. So under ceiling grid I have model, plan, plan high detail, low detail, plan screened, reflected, and reflected screened. Those are just different options for how the ceiling grid could show up. And then I could tweak each one of those a little differently if I wanted. So let me show you some examples so that this will be a little bit easier to understand. Let me go back down to the walls here under my objects. Remember when I changed the display configuration to presentation, it made all the walls a solid hatch that was orange, solid orange. So let me show you where that's kind of coming from. If I go back up to my presentation configuration, I can see when I'm in top view, it's using the plan presentation display representation set, plan presentation. So now I'm going to go down to the bottom, my plan presentation representation of the wall. So when I select that on the right side, this is my graphical control for how the walls then would look when I'm in that presentation display configuration. I have the hatching tab, and you can see there's a shrink wrap hatch solid pattern that is being applied. So that's why it was a solid orange, is because of that solid pattern. And well, the color part is coming from here on the layer color line type tab, shrink wrap hatch on off, and then you have your layer options, your color options, your line type options, line weight options, etc. So if I decided I really hated the orange and I wanted to change the color, I could make it a blue here and hit OK. And then when I hit OK again and go back to presentation mode, now I have it as blue instead of orange. So back to the display manager. So just to kind of show you that how I got there again, I expanded configurations. I went to presentation to check and see which representation set gets applied in top view when I'm in presentation configuration, and that is plan presentation. And then in my objects, I went down to walls, and then I go to plan presentation, and then there's all of my graphical control. So I could change the color or the line weight or the hatching or whatever else I wanted to do. So let's look at another example. Another one was the screened version, and I use it as an example of if you're doing a different type of drawing, like an engineer's drawing where you wanted everything to be very light. So if I go to my screened configuration, you can see that the representation set that's being applied is plan screened. So now I'll go back down to my walls and look at plan screened. and then the layer color line type tab. So here's where you can see everything is set on this specific layer, a ano screen, and then the color is by layer. The line weight is all set to a hard specific number. So as long as the layer is all a ano screen and then the color is by layer, then everything is going to be that kind of dark gray, almost black, and that's being pulled from the layer manager because it's set to by layer for the color. So let's go look at, I'm going to hit OK and then go to my layer manager because it's by layer. So here's that A ano screen layer, and you can see it's color 250. So maybe that was just really hard for me to see. So let me raise that to 252. Keep in mind this might change how it prints depending on what type of plot style table I'm using, but I just wanted to make it something that was easier to see on the screen so you could see another example of how this is working. So I'm changing that layer's color to 252, and then I'll close out and go back to plan screened, or screened, excuse me. Now you can see that that gray is much easier to see. It's not so dark black anymore. So that's the basic idea of how that's working. So you can use that to control the graphics of your AEC objects or multi-view blocks, and you can use it to control the visibility of those objects. So you'll notice that all these list of objects are your AEC objects that are going to respond to the display configuration. So just to reiterate, because it's very important, that non-intelligent, non-AEC objects won't respond to these settings at all. Lines, arcs, circles, things like that will not work. And that's why companies that use AutoCAD architecture for BIM have to go out of their way to use only the AEC objects, and that includes things like even shelving and cabinetry and all those types of issues. So if you're going to be using this type of system, then you would make sure you use your design center objects as much as you can and stay on the AEC content tab, because these are multi-view block references, so when you bring them in they will respond to the display configuration. So these are the types of furniture blocks that you would use on the AEC content tab and not on the folders tab. It is possible to make your own custom multi-view block references that do respond to the display configuration button. That will have to be a separate video. The next important item that I want to talk about is the cut plane. Remember that was showing down there at 3.6. When I'm looking at my display manager settings for the configuration, see if I select medium detail, you have the cut plane tab, and that's where it has the cut height actually set for this display configuration. So that's important to keep in mind. A lot of times people will put, let's say, a high window, like a clerestory window, and it won't show in the plan. Well, that's kind of normal because it's probably above 3'6". So it's taken a literal section at 3'6" above your zero height, and then anything below that will show, or at that height that's being cut through. Anything above that, like a clerestory window, will not show up. So you can adjust the cut plane if you wanted. A lot of times what you end up doing is making a couple different display configurations that have different heights set. And that's kind of what this medium detail, intermediate level, and top level are here for, so that you can adjust your cut plane height. So I could set this zone up at 10 feet high or 12 feet high, and then do the top level at 20 feet or something like that, so that the cut planes will correspond to each level of the project. So if I did that, that would allow me to literally stack my second floor on top of the first floor. So I'm going to go ahead and move that second floor to be on top of the first floor by doing a move command and using my O-snaps in the corner of the building. So now it's literally stacked like the real BIM model would be. And then I'm going to go back to my top view. So now I only see the first floor, although I do see the edge of the slab above as dashed. And this is an opening that doesn't have the right settings set, so that apparently needs to get fixed. That should not be showing, obviously. So if I wanted to switch to the intermediate level, then that would theoretically show my second floor. It's not working now because the heights are all set at 3.6. So let's go and fix that. So I'm going to go back to my display manager and go to my intermediate level. And my first floor walls are 12 feet high. So I'm going to set this to 15'6" because then that will give me 3'6" above the second floor. So now I can hit OK. And now you can see how that is showing the second floor objects. It's also showing objects that are underneath that down on the first floor because you're looking through the second and the first floor altogether. If I wanted to fix this so that the first floor walls were not visible when I do my second floor, there's a few ways I could do that. One way would be to look at how the wall style is set up, and I would say wall style because in this case there's a style override. If you don't have a style override, then you would edit this in the overall display setup under the bottom category of objects. Now I can look at my properties here, and you have below cut plane on or off with the light bulb. So now I can hit OK and OK, and then those have gone away. This one's still visible because that's a different style. So again, depends on whether or not you have style overrides applied. A lot of times you do. The other option though, if you don't, is go by objects, and then I can go down to walls in plan, and then uncheck this for below cut plane. So that's if you do not have style overrides applied in terms of the graphics and display properties. So now I can hit OK. This one does have style overrides applied, so I do need to go and edit that wall style as well. You can see why having a template makes this a lot easier. It's because then ideally you get this set up one time in one place, and then you don't have to always be going and changing these small settings. Now my next important comment about understanding how this process works is really just to clarify in case you change the wrong setting. If you're in the style editor and in display properties, you have a cut plane tab there, and you have the option to override the display configuration's cut plane. So you have to be cautious. If you check this, it's going to ignore if you have specifically set a cut plane different than 3.6 in your display configuration. It's not very often that you would want to do this, so you just leave this unchecked most of the time, and then that lets the overall cut plane height decide how the graphics work in terms of the walls and doors and things like that. Just to want to throw that out as a common error or question that comes up from time to time.